Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H Event Space. You're tuned in to Photographing New York, creating a meaningful body of work. And for those of you who think this is just going to be an hour-long love letter to New York, you're right. But that doesn't mean you should leave, because you know what? Bruce is here. My good friend, my neighbor, Bruce Katz, is going to talk to us about creating a body of work that is meaningful. Emphasis on the term body of work. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Bruce Katz back to the program.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you on. This time, we were joking around in the green room, Bruce, that it's like now I get to sit here and we get to talk. It's like our coffee shop meeting virtually now, instead of you talking to a screen, the interaction, we get to dive into your brain a little bit and see over the last 4 decades how you've been cooking up what you've been cooking up. So I'm appreciating this opportunity.
Oh, it's great. I'm so pleased to be here and pick away at what's left of my brain after 40 years. So
I'm sure there's probably more still in there than I've will ever
I hope
encounter in
so.
a lifetime.
I hope
Now,
so.
well, Bruce, we talked about this and big fan of your work. And I think, when we were talking about having you back on, it was like, you know, the trajectory of where your work started and where it went. And I think it's so, for me, it resonates so much with the artist experience. A lot of stuff that we experience of just seeing where it began, seeing where we progressed, where it went to, and how we got there. And so that being said, I want to start where my introduction to your work began. So I'm going to share my screen for a moment,
Great.
and I'm going to show the viewers and kind of give them the same introduction that I had. It was through your interior work. Now, interior work for me, I love a good interior. And I think a lot of times we put so much on, okay, well, yes, you need some good interior design, but a photographer is not just going in there and pushing a button, as I've learned many times over. And as I learned when I went to probably what I consider the mecca of design, Palm Springs, California, and thought I could just hold my camera up in every direction and get good photos. And I was proven wrong. So I kind of just want to thumb through these here, Bruce, and feel free
Great.
to anything that comes to mind. But this was my introduction to your work, and I fell in love with the way you see things and the way that you're able to capture. And this is it for me about photography. You're able to capture what you see and really take that beauty and relate it to the viewer.
Yeah, I was very fortunate. The beginning of my career, I don't know whether I had mentioned this to you in our chats, but I was pretty much set on being a world-class photojournalist. And I was good at the photography part, but the journalism stuff had me stymied for years. And one of my early clients was an architect when I was living in Washington, D.C. And he was working at a firm, and the proprietor of the firm was a little too um, and I got an early job to shoot some of his work, his design work, and it all worked out really well. And I just kind of kept the doors kept opening for me in that sector. So, I was foolish not to step through those doors. And I ended up just, it was kind of the days where, I don't know, people would throw work at me, but I ended up getting a lot of work doing architecture and interiors from the very beginning. And, uh, so as I kind of explored that, I realized, um, that with photography, there's photography you want to do, there's photography that you do, and there's photography that you do well. And the photography you do well, the doors tend to open for you. So that's kind of the genesis of the interior stuff. I just kept getting the work, and then I took the deep dive into um, how to make it even better and better. And for better or worse, my my lighting style, or back in the film days, you'd have to bring a lot of gear, a lot of lighting, a lot of technical expertise to shooting interiors. And I developed a nice style that people seem to react to. and set me on that path. So
It's clean and there's so much art to it. One of my first forays into interiors was early on in my career. I picked up a job, and I've always been interested in architecture, and I think that's one of the things that draws me to your work. You know, clearly there's a hell of a lot of architecture in your bodies of work, and my work was it was, and I'm gonna look right at the camera. I am not shading any real estate photographers out there, but my work, there's a difference. There's a difference between a real estate listing and what you're doing. I consider this art. And my work was very, yeah. And it didn't matter how nice the interior was. What is it about the way you see and the way you capture that elevates your work in your mind?
well, I think there are two things. One is I've always had a really good sense of composition and how things fit together in front of you. And the second was kind of developing a style of lighting that you kind of see through, the stuff we're scrolling through, where I try and make the interiors and the architecture look natural and feel like you've just walked into a space and it's comfortable. And the third aspect of it is the idea of telling a story with a series of photographs. And that I kind of learned early on because several of my opportunities early in my career were doing a lot of magazine stories. And there's a difference between just shooting a beautiful image and capturing the story of a particular space. And uh, figuring out how to tell those stories, I think, is part and parcel of why I was able to kind of um, move up in the world because you can talk to a client and say, I always tell people, um, one good image is going to serve you much better than having three or four images that are just so-so in an architect's portfolio or, showing work. You want that one double page spread in a magazine as opposed to a lot of little pictures the way you would have for a real estate listing.
Mm.
So trying to find that hero shot, um, trying to connect photographs so that um, you'll see like a piece of the kitchen in the living room shot, and then you'll see the kitchen so that the viewer who's flipping through the magazine can connect the dots, as it were. Um, and that's stuff I thankfully learned very early on, and it seemed to have served me well, particularly with when I started working for Architectural Digest back in the early 90s. Um, Very high pressure jobs and uh, really labor intensive. 16 hours on set,
Ooh.
doing shooting 4x5 with film and Polaroid and that kind of work. You had to get it right. You're working with the architect or interior designer, and they're looking over your shoulder. And everybody has to remember it's a win-win situation. You're making them look good, their work look beautiful, even if it's as an interior something that it's not your taste. It's not about me. It's about making the images to serve them and the magazine real well. And um, I felt like I was able to do that, and just kind of kept getting that work. So um, that was my big training. But the key thing there, there's two things. I mean, you said something about um, making it art. And I, one of the things that I always hold in my back of my mind is doesn't matter the job, there's always the opportunity to make art when you're behind the camera. If I'm shooting a grip and grin job that I've done, for friends at a dinner party, you can still get some very funny, entertaining pictures. Maybe it doesn't fit into your portfolio, but there's always the opportunity. And that's I think the key to it is being open to um, making something that's special. At least for me, that's what I try and do is get the most out of it, the best picture under the circumstances.
I love that. Everything you said jived with what I feel about your work and with what I felt even before talking to you, the comfortability, the emphasis on composition. I smiled over here when you were talking about leading, kind of, including a piece of the kitchen when photographing the living room to kind of have that tie, because there was one image in particular. Let's see if I can go there real quick. That's what jumped out to me, and I was going to ask you about it, and I kind of had an inkling that that's why, but to hear right here, and it was just like this image for me. It's like how many people would not know how to navigate whatever that is on the left there, that woodworking. And for me, it was such a beautiful way to incorporate it because I would see and it's like, okay, it's too beautiful to leave out. But the question is always, how do you fit stuff in? How do you make the puzzle pieces get together? Which kind of leads into your point of there's always a way to make art. There's always a way
Right.
to accomplish something.
Yeah, this one in particular is, a story of, pat myself on the back for my lighting skills. But we were working up in Connecticut on this particular project, and it was an architect who did a renovation at a very beautiful house up in Connecticut. So not all the space in the place was his. And, of course, they're long days and you're setting up. And the sun had set, and we still hadn't really had time to get to their dining room, which had this lovely gold leaf. I mean, as you see here, it's kind of arts and crafts, um, not Art Deco, but that's his specialty. And I really everything else I had done during the day, so the project itself felt open. So I really just wanted to get a feel of like daylight coming into this room. But this is all, 10 o'clock at night with tungsten lights to get
Oh,
a
no way.
feel of daylight. Uh, and so have it still read like it's part of the story, but not feel like you're shooting this at 10 o'clock at night, where you would handle it much differently if you had fire in the fireplace and votives lit, candles lit, that kind of thing.
Mission
So
accomplished. It did it. It
um,
fit right into the
yeah, that
everything
that was
else.
the goal, was to fit it into the story and to not have the viewers think that you were shooting something, 10 or 11 o'clock at night. So
I love that. Now I'm gonna
desperation
pull.
works really well on occasion.
Hey, look, whatever gets the
Yeah.
job done, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna pull down the share screen, but I want our viewers, do a little bit of homework and pull up on your own time, pull up Bruce's site and look through that same folder because a big kind of learning moment for me, Bruce, was in looking at your work was we get so caught up in the technical and in this idea that everything has to be exposed perfectly and you have to expose for the light outside the window and then light the interior. No, and I think that was such a moment for me in looking at your work and I'm like, wow, I don't even I'm not even going. The technical side of my brain isn't even being pinged. I am in and feeling the image. And there's certain images where you have that light that's spilling in from the window, casting that glow onto things around it. And you do have stuff that's on the overexposed side, but it plays into the overall frame and the overall feeling of the frame. And that comfort, that coziness, that hominess, that I'm sitting in a room that has beautiful window light and I'm looking at this picture from a nice comfy seat on the other side of the room. That's the vibe I get.
Well,
So
that's
I
the way, I mean, that's the way people perceive rooms when they walk into them. And um, it's a matter, I think, of having the technical chops to do it well given the circumstances. let me see, if you don't mind, I'll
Yeah.
pull up something.
We're on the side of the highway changing drivers now.
So this is a great example of
Yep.
what you're talking
Yep.
about.
That was the one that was
And
what I was thinking.
this was a project I shot in Washington, D.C. Some actually very lifelong friends of mine who are architects. And the entire reason for having this so open and so ethereal is both um, inviting and helps their space along, but it's also very pragmatic, and and the reason being is there's an alley in between their building and the next building, and all you can see out the window, if this was perfectly exposed, would be a brick wall.
Oh,
So
no way.
it's, pre-Photoshop, it's really just being able to handle, um, you know, make the best out of, I won't say a bad situation, but use what's there um, to to show the space better. And I've kept a little hint of these of the shades in there, and that's where you have to have your technical chops down to know where your exposure is, and do you need to push this is back in the film days, so you push the film an extra half stop so you just still have detail in the window moldings, but everything else is blown out where you're not seeing the crap that's outside the window. Um,
Intentionality at
yeah,
its
that's
best.
situation awareness, I guess, is
Yeah, totally.
uh,
Well, that's yeah. It's like you have like this great restraint, and I think that's what I'm getting at is knowing when, knowing when you can push it, how much to push it, knowing why you're pushing it, and why you're pushing it X amount. So
all right.
that
And let me
that's
just there's let's see if I can find one other quick example
yeah,
of
definitely. Look,
the
man, you can sit here
opposite.
and show me images all day, and I'll be content.
This is the opposite example. So this is a client with that does these automated blinds. And here you really do want to see outside. So you're waiting for sunset, twilight, and then all of the, how do you want to render it? And of course, you're styling the room and lighting appropriately and composing. And, the biggest challenge of this was getting all these blinds lined up perfectly. They're all on switches, and, there's always one that's a little out of alignment, that kind of thing. But overall, it's how do you render the rest of the city? This is a case where you want to see outside. That's part of the deal. So I'll leave that there. But that's the you have to have the technical ability to do both when the situation demands it. That's
I love that. Now you set the table, and really what the kind of underlying theme of why we're here talking today is this idea of a body of work and not just singular images. And you talked about it in relation to the interior of having that cohesive vision. Whether it's we think of it in editorial, we think of it whenever you're looking through publications. Okay, there's a storyline. You have to stick to that editorial vibe, and everything has to jive. But in all your work, I mean, that's kind of that's a dominant theme, and I think that's something that you see in successful artists and photographers alike, that they do have this really good grasp of cohesion and how humans respond to cohesion.
I agree completely. I think that's the one of the biggest things that for hobbyists and enthusiasts, folks that are not making a full-time living shooting photography. One of the big differences that I see is that um, you're presenting portfolios, a cohesive body of work. And individual images can be, I mean, spectacular, beautiful sunset or whatever it happens to be. Um, but the truth is that for people that are looking at your work, for art galleries, for um, photo editors, they are always looking for, as you say, a cohesive body of work where when you look through a project, um, every picture that you're showing is telling a piece of the story. Um, and that's prevalent certainly when you're doing editorial work, and that's where I learned that, shooting for Architectural Digest. Um, Many of my clients are looking at, there are multiple ways that I come to doing projects. I don't look at images individually, or very rarely look at images individually um, for myself anymore. I'm always thinking in terms of a project. Um, and, with commercial work, I'm going to pull up I've been lucky. I've had some very, very nice clients, and I go out and I shoot for them, very high-end real estate people and architects and designers. And we're telling the story of New York through um, their leasing. But, one of the beauties of, I guess, photographing digitally these days, um, and habitually, what I do is I'll shoot for them. And then if I'm in a place, this was from probably the 70th floor of the Empire State Building, shooting views for my client, the Empire State Building. And, lovely sunset on a magnificent, maybe one of the most beautiful buildings in New York City, the Chrysler Building.
Mm,
So
definitely.
I'm shooting, and it's like the majority of the work is for them, but I always make sure to shoot a couple of frames for myself. And having done that habitually over years, um, you get to the point where this particular image, the backstory on this image is this is a complete afterthought. I had a friend of mine, a photographer friend of mine. I had put together a couple of images in black and white of New York. Um, this one in particular, again, shot for my clients, but they wanted color. And I'm goofing around in Lightroom and came up with this, and was just sharing it with a couple of friends, and they said, you really should put together a portfolio of New York City, these classic shots. And so I did, and we'll go through here. These are just basically um, grab shots for me while I'm on location for a commercial client. And it's just being open to the moment, knowing that you're in a special place, there's stuff going on. To me, just, these clouds make this shot. Um,
Is there an
and
overarching anything you're going for in your images, or is it case by case? I see something, I like it, I photograph it.
in this particular body of work, it's the latter. It's exactly that. I have an opportunity to make what I think, it's a beautiful morning. How many people get access to a space that has this view of New York or this view of the Chrysler Building?
Mm.
Um, and I shoot it. And then I went back and culled through my work. I didn't print this or get to this image until 6 years after I made it.
Wow.
That's why I say it was a complete afterthought, because my friends were like, hey, your black and white New York stuff is really nice. You should put together a portfolio of it. So I did. And in going through the work, this particular image was one of the last that I had pulled up. And, for me, I do my own printing. And when this came out of the printer, it was like you just knew it was something special. It was easy to put together. It just worked. Some images you have to work on for months to get it just right. This is one that, just worked. And it's the idea of, never throw away your work, revisit it. None of this portfolio would have existed if I didn't have a conversation with a friend that was telling me what they were thinking about some of the black and white work of New York City.
Wild.
So, you know, that's, that's what leads to, the body of work. And it's
Mm.
just like, this one was made, probably just a year ago. The first of that project was probably 15 years ago. So it's 15 years of going out shooting for clients, and you can organize it into a cohesive body of work. And now I have, a powerful view of the city, um, and it hangs together. Um, and that's what I say is, anytime you're behind the camera, you have that opportunity to make something special. And, here I am just doing, I won't say, doing nice work for my clients, but keeping always in the back of my mind, hey, let me get this shot for myself.
I love that. Now we did have a question come in, Bruce, asking, do you have a favorite vantage point in the city to shoot from? And I'm gonna take this in two ways. Do you have a location, like a proximity, or everybody has their own, like, oh, I love to shoot the Manhattan from Queens, or I love to shoot Manhattan from the Brooklyn Promenade. So let's go location and then vantage point being, a lot of these are higher up, gives you that nice elevated view.
Yeah, this
So
is, I just feel tremendously lucky to have had clients that put me in a position, figuratively and literally, of being out on the roof of a building in Midtown, or, um, uh, as I said, one of my longtime clients was, I worked through an advertising agency for the folks at the Empire State Building. So probably a full 15 years of shooting for them. And so who wouldn't want a phone call saying, Bruce, can you come by? We need you to shoot the views of New York City from dawn to dusk from the 70th floor. And the window's open.
mm,
So you can set up a tripod. You're not shooting through glass, and you can just capture the city. So far and away, they are easily my favorite people. They were fantastic to work with, lovely people, and just, amazing opportunity to work with them. But that continues, through plenty of other clients, because, uh, here I think I was on, one of the old buildings on 34th Street, and you're out overlooking the UN. And here I am, tipping my hat to Ansel Adams and Moonrise Hernandez. Well, Moonrise East River. Um, not quite the same, but I'll take it, and it's just, um, uh, I just have fun with it. And as I said, this is one way of approaching a body of work. This is where I took all my commercial work and reinterpreted it to put together a body of work. And then there are other projects that, I'm working on. This is what we talked about having coffee, of where you really set out to do something just for yourself. Um, and, that's a second way of exploring New York, where something that you run into on uh, on a subway ride might lead to another project. And you know, I can uh, show you what I'm talking about if you like, or
Yeah, definitely. Let's,
we
because
can.
I think, yeah, it's
Okay.
a great segue, and it's really a great way to look at things, as this project proves, that you can be out there creating professional work and not have to shut off the personal or passion project side of your brain. And by the same
Yes.
token, you can do a passion project and find that you love something enough to turn it into a business opportunity, or take a passion project and a business opportunity can spawn from it.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, both work.
Mm.
But I think one of the big things with I mean, almost every single photographer I know that who I like and admire are always thinking about images. You know, it's kind of a non, you know, I can't think of any photographers um, that, you know, have influenced me over the years and, you know, people I like and admire. They're always thinking about projects. They get an idea and they run with it. Um, you know, the thing when I was talking about photojournalism to begin with is that, you know, they have a story idea and they go out and photograph it. They make the story happen. Where the story takes them is one place. For me, I work kind of, I won't say, most of the time I work backwards from that. I'm out, I'll shoot, I'll play around with ideas. I'm always shooting on my cell phone. Um, uh, and I've always loved exploring the city. So, you know, one of the projects I had a few years back at this point, um, I had been at a subway stop that both of us know well up at 231st Street in the Bronx on the one train. And there was one of these karate blow up dolls that are like 15 feet tall, you know, like the Santas in people's front yards. And it was just waving. It was on the roof of uh, uh, a karate place up in the Bronx. And it was just funny. And I took you know, made my friends laugh by posting a little picture of this on Facebook. But it got me into thinking about how New Yorkers, you know, we all know our own subway stops for those of us that live on, you know, the elevated subway lines. You know, you're always seeing the city through the subway cars as you go through the city. And that triggered an interest in me. And then I found myself in the subway visiting every above ground subway station in the city, you know, from Staten Island to the Bronx to Queens to Brooklyn. And, you know, so over a period of 2 years, um, you know, I'm doing this work. And there were fits and starts. I thought it was going to be more of a street photography thing with people, and you notice through this body of work, there's no sense of the subway. It's really just the view from the platform. But you know, anyone that knows the city would be able to figure out, oh, okay, that's Dyckman Street, or um,
That's how
this
I
is
know
Dyckman.
when to get off. Every single time I come back uptown,
Right,
I literally, it's like I'm half out of it, and I look out and I'm like, all right, I see the train yard. I'm at 207. I got two more stops.
right, exactly. So, you know, New York, and then it gets into you get into the little details of riding the subway, which is like you're in the third car, you want to be at the second door so that when you get out of the subway, you're right at the edge.
Yes.
You know, this is how New Yorkers
Yes.
think about their subway. But to me, it was like you can you can really see neighborhoods and all the stuff that was never designed to be seen from, you know, from the subway stop. I mean, architects are not thinking about, what the roof of the buildings are like with air conditioning ducts and satellite dishes and, all this stuff. And to me, it's the story of New York. So, this is what set me on this little path. I mean, here's somebody's like cart and potted plants that they're storing up on the roof because they don't have room in their little tiny apartments out in Brooklyn. They shove the stuff up on the roof. And
It's
this is what you
it's
see from the subway
yeah,
stop.
and it's such an interesting perspective that you pointed out, the dynamic of a view that wasn't intended, it wasn't designed to give that view. It was designed with something completely different in mind. Even on the most intentional architectural ventures, they weren't designed to be looked at from an elevated subway line. This is stuff
Right.
that, and finding beauty in that, and just everything you pointed out is what I think makes this so great and really drives home the whole idea of what we're talking about today of putting together a project. You said something and it was like an instant epiphany in my head, and it's like something I knew, but it didn't really register until you said it, that of all the artists that you respect, all the artists that you draw inspiration from, how they don't, it's not about single images, it's about projects. And it
Right.
really sunk in that yes, everybody, same thing for me. The people whose work I really like, whose work really motivates me and inspires me, are the people that are constantly doing projects. They're seen in terms of cohesive ideas. It's not just a one off. And I feel that for all of its benefits, one of the ills of the social media age is this one shot, one take, one frame. I just want to go one picture to go viral. And I don't think we I don't think we think in terms of projects enough, which is why I love the idea of talking about this today and seeing things on a larger scale. And it's storytelling, that's what we
That's
are. We're
exact that
storytellers.
that's the word. Um, Even if you're working, when you think of like great abstract artists, Pollock or the modern abstractionists, their work is so unique and they're telling their story, and their story, um, it's still a story. Their body of work is still um, uh, a particular story, even though the images themselves are completely abstract. For me, um, this particular project, I mean, you can look at certain images here. This you probably know really, really well. Um, but there's like, there are two things that I'm looking at when I'm shooting, particularly in New York. And one of the things that I react to is a sense of the a WTF moment, a mystery. So, if you look out at this was from Crescent Street on the J train out in Brooklyn, I think. And, so what's going on here? Look at the roof of this industrial building. What's happening there? It turns out it was a giant fire and the roof had collapsed. And, um, you still have the neighborhood here and, some storage space in the background. And it all combines to create this little what is going on here moment. And, when you think about all the commuters that are seeing this every day, um, to me, the delight in doing a project like this is kind of showing people what's in front of their faces in a new light. And, or with fresh eyes. Here we are in Staten Island, back in Brooklyn. Um, this is what everybody sees on their subway platform. And and this, the cyclone. I mean, you can't get any more New York than this. And just so happened, I'm looking at this image and I'm going, this like, there is no one in this shot. And I did not remove people from this picture. So, I'm out there on a cloudy winter day and, it's Coney Island, but it's deserted. And, I mean, part of it is just luck, but, um, you do make your own luck. Let's put it that way. So, and here, this is another perfect example of like
Brooklyn? Is that Brooklyn?
Brooklyn. Yeah, this is, I think, the F train, Bay Parkway.
Yep. Okay, looks familiar.
And so this is the subway stop. Here you have storage for Mr. Softy ice cream trucks. And then one of the old legendary, I think it's Washington Cemetery. I don't know, but big cemetery out in Brooklyn. And then you have the whatchamacallit bridge. Help me out there, Staten Island, the
The
Verrazano Bridge in the
Verrazano.
background. And, the wires and the fences. I mean, you know, this screams, for us that live in New York, it screams New York, but for people that are not familiar with the city, it's like, what is going on here? What is this about? And to me, that's what drives me, to put together, people that are familiar with uh, street art and graffiti would probably be able to tell neighborhoods by the tags that are in these
Mm.
shots, that kind of thing.
Which in and of
It's that,
itself is it's a language, and that dynamic is because that whole world I've been involved in that world a long time. And Matt Weber has, and he was an early in the graffiti scene and also street photography, but that aspect of it, that adds a whole nother layer because there's a level of respect among these guys of, what you
right,
tagged where and the whole territorial aspect. But also it is like it tells a story of eras, different eras, who reigned supreme during this era, what names are up there. And I think that's such a cool layer woven into the entire fabric.
right. And, it's there, and, I don't know that much about it, but it's present. And when you start culling through these images, you realize it's like, all right, you're recognizing, certainly I recognize, that stuff, but it's part and parcel of what New Yorkers experience. So, to me, that's kind of this particular project was totally self-generated. It came from a silly photo I took at 231, and then I ended up spending, almost 2 years on the subways of New York, just uh, following, just trying to find these spaces. Um, I didn't photograph I visited every single stop, but I didn't photograph from every single stop. I tried
Mhm.
to look at it as a story, you know,
I wanted to
which
ask you about
images
that.
are adding something, and what's redundant. And that's how I think about these projects.
Yeah, how
So,
did you decide? Because I know I do it all the time. The four train is another one of my favorites to look out the window and just to see how the Bronx has changed over the years. Because I'm in between the one and the four, so it's like, okay, which am I going to ride today?
right, I'm trying
And
to find the four for you,
there you
or maybe
go. Because it's one of those I love looking out on the four train, and there's so many times when I'm like, okay, I have been saying it for probably 10 years now that I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna get off at this stop and take a picture from here or even out the window, and I never do it. How are you planning out the views? Are you just, is it just, do you go on scouting rides, or is it just, hey, I'm running downtown and boom, I looked out the window and I noticed this, I want to come back and stop? Are you getting off at particular stops? Do you ever shoot out the window?
no. Well, this particular project, uh, once once I got my footing, once I really had a direction for it, it's right. Probably the first couple of images. Uh, well, I've just pulled up the Ford train for you. So this is
Oh,
Fordham
the Fordham
Road.
Road.
Yeah, and this one is 176. So here you go.
I
Um,
love it.
and um, shooting of this project was, it was almost always, once I got going, was all deliberate. I'm taking time, and it's like I asked friends and, figured out which subway lines had elevated portions of it, and I'd take a day or 2 or 3 days, and I'd explore those lines. And I'd get out, I'd I'd scout from the front of the train as we're pulling into the station and kind of see if there's anything interesting and access at that particular station. And if I thought it was good, I'd get out and I'd work the platform until the next train came. And then I'd repeat the process and leapfrog it. So, you end up on the F train out in Brooklyn, or, the 4 in the Bronx. And, not every station had anything that was particularly interesting, but it was, oh, I love to shoot, and secret to me is in the editing.
Hmm.
It's like, what appeals to me and why, and then am I adding to the story or am I not adding to the story?
Yeah.
So, you know, it this particular project was completely deliberate. Once I had my key images uh, decided from the beginning of the project, then I could go out and just search and look. And I would deliberately, none of this was done as an aside. Taking the
Mhm.
camera out, and, they were, all right, I'm going to explore the A train out to the Rockaway this week. And I'd go out there.
Mhm.
And,
See,
and then
this
I met,
image,
so go ahead.
yeah, no, this image for me, I just wanted to point something out that for me, it's like, like, why are we on this spinning rock? And why do we take photos of it? And I look at this image, and it's a perfect chance to just talk about photography in regards to, photographers, we live very impassioned lives, especially those of us who photograph what we see, street photographers, people like yourself who photograph their everyday surroundings. And you just look at like this, the little design, the architectural design, the stuff that, again, going back to what you said, that it wasn't intended for somebody to be standing on a subway platform across from it looking at it. That attention to detail, that someone put that on there, someone did that, someone put that, that's somebody's hard work that went into that. And the little details that we notice in a project like this that we often forget if we lose sight of why we're photographing, it's the little details. It's being able to appreciate, people always ask, why are you always smiling? Is it fake? Or do you really enjoy life that much? And I'm like, well, hell yeah. Because being a photographer, it's like, man, I walk around the neighborhood and I see things that other people don't see. And I
That's,
find joy in that.
yeah, that's it in a nutshell. Right there is one of the one of the best compliments I got about doing some work. And I'll just pull up very briefly um, a different project that was done a little more haphazardly, but again, I spent time exploring the city and doing some black and white stuff. And this goes back, it's probably the last time I shot a little bit of film was early 2000s, and then moved this into digital. But I have a friend of mine, I don't know if you know Leland Babé, a
Mm.
wonderful photographer. I met him through, mutual friends in ASMP. And he's a lifelong New Yorker. So, and we were really just talking about designing websites and stuff. But he was looking through this work, and he goes, I grew up here in New York. He was part of the punk rock scene, playing music. He knew the Ramones. He was all in that space. And he goes, yeah, and I drove a cab in the city. And I've lived here all my life in Queens and Brooklyn and Manhattan. And he goes, and I've never seen these pictures of New York like this. These are all within the boundaries of New York City. And to me, that was, you know, such a wonderful compliment, because I'm showing a dyed-in-the-wool New Yorker, parts of New York that he's, never seen. Out in the Bronx. This is the parking lot out in Pelham Bay Park when we had a giant snowfall, and they truck all the snow in there to let it melt, from Midtown. And there's a little machine that's melting snow. It looks like the Arctic.
It
Um,
does.
it's that kind of, we're out in Floyd Bennett Field or whatever it's called, Gateway National Recreational Area, and this is just mulch on an old, it's not one of the runways, but one of the, out there, and out on Staten Island after Hurricane Sandy, that kind of thing. So, it's just finding these landscapes again in the city that you're like, this one I love. It's some park in the back end of Coney Island, with the Verrazano Bridge. And, I forget the name of the park off the top of my head, but you'd never in 1,000 years go there. It's just a little local park. And I'm always thinking, I'm going to find some old mob guy washed up. And again, this,
I know that one.
from our neighborhood, but it's like, people that live in Midtown and the Upper West Side don't know,
Yeah.
they don't venture up here. They don't know. So to me, the idea of presenting this stuff to people, it was interesting to me. And by extension, you'd hope that people react to it. And again, this was a project that was done just like those. There was, uh, let me see if I can, I think this image was one of the first, it was just such a curiosity. This little arrow here just makes it for me. But sorry, this was one of the first that was made,
Oh,
and
this
I went
one.
out to Reese Park in the Rockaways to photograph some of the Art Deco, you know, the old beach house and stands there. And, they had put these little mounds up for erosion control or something. And it's like, you could be on Mars for all you know. And that's what, flip the switch is like, all right, I need to see what else I can find in New York that looks like this. So that's how that project got started. And it was much longer and more sprawling. It probably took me 6 or 8 years to, looking back on it, I probably, would edit it a little differently and print some of the stuff a little differently. And that might happen. But again, still it's like, um, it's that tug between keep working on a project and finding something new,
Mm.
that kind of thing. So.
I was gonna keep you on the line if we didn't get to this project, by the way. I'm like, I didn't there's so much work to go through, and I'm like, I don't know how many projects we're gonna go, but we got because this is one of my favorites, and it's the fact that it's not even like I feel sometimes when I look out my window where I'm like, it's not a very New York view. I feel like people that aren't from New York expect all of us have a view of Midtown or what you would think is like a Midtown view. And you look out and you're
Right.
like, all right, my view, I can see the Palisades better than I can see Midtown from, Midtown's completely blocked. But I look at this and it's not even like close to New York. Like I look at some of these images and they give me Death Valley vibes. They give me
Yeah.
Mars, and it
Yeah.
looks
Yeah.
so far removed from New York that's what I think is so cool about it. It's not just like, oh, I can't tell it's New York. It's like, no, it looks like the furthest possible place from New York.
That was the conceit of this body of work is like showing people New York that, even dyed-in-the-wool New Yorkers don't know,
It's not on the
or don't get the
postcards in
time to
Midtown.
explore. I mean, it's not that they don't know. I mean, plenty of people go out to Reese Park,
Mhm.
but it's that idea. But let me take a tiny little segue from what you were talking about your view and just talk about a recent project. Underlying all this is like, how do you get to thinking about projects that you work on? So, there was the commercial ones that I kind of reinvented, the ones I went out on my own for, and I was able, over the years, a friend of mine, uh, who ended up being the director of the Morris Jamel Mansion, had approached me with doing kind of like my elevated lines project, the subway project, but taking that and applying it to the Morris Jamel Mansion and the history of the mansion. And for those of you who don't know, it's one of the oldest um, houses in New York City. It's in Washington Heights. Um, and it was built in 1775 or 17 in the 1750s, I think. And so here was I put together a body of work that was an art assignment. It was almost like a commercial assignment where we had the idea. The idea didn't come from me. It came from the curator and the director. And they ended up getting, amazingly, got a New York State Fine Arts grant to do it. But one of the reasons I was laughing is that it is pretty close to your view. So this project is based on the history of the property. And this is a drawing of the Battle of Fort Washington from 1776. You have the date here. It's the 16th of November, 1776, by a British Army officer who was drawing the battle. So this is our neighborhood. This is Dyckman Street. This is Fort Washington. Morris Jamel Mansion is right over here at the end of the thing. And so this is this amazing historical document from the Revolutionary War where, the New York troops, Washington's troops, got their ass kicked and headed over to New Jersey, and the British took over the Morris Jamel Mansion as their headquarters. So I got up in what's Bronx Community College,
Oh,
which
wow.
is adjacent to you, and photographed what it looks like now, hundreds of years later. And again, the Morris Jamel Mansion would be over here. Here's the Dyckman Street. And, he took artistic license with his drawing, but this is, kind of the before and after, and I didn't do it that much with the project. There was a little bit of it, but, this is probably pretty close to where you are, right? I mean,
Yeah, I'm right north of Fordham. So I'm
yeah,
actually right at the bend of the Harlem where the Harlem River bends to go
right.
down to the
Yeah, so
Columbia Sea,
that's literally, not even it's
blocks south of me. That's
yeah,
it.
just a few blocks
Yeah.
north
Wow, that's insane.
where you are. But, that was the conceit of this project. And I use this as an example of, taking on an art project with deliberation. In other words, I wasn't reacting to a funny picture I had taken. This was every bit the assignment from the museum to create a body of work based on the history of the property. And I'll just go through it really quickly. This was a few months later, the same artist did a drawing from the front yard of Morris Jamel Mansion. And, this is kind of what it looks like today. So, there's a little bit of this before and after, but most of it was coming from maps of the old property and figuring out where, this northwest corner of the property, and this is what it looks like today. It's the on-ramp to the GW Bridge from a little park up in Washington Heights at 178th Street. And how to make the modern city relate to the 1700s was a tall order. Um, and I just decided to photograph it, in a very modern architectural way. Um, and it seemed to have worked out. So,
Wow. That's awesome. That's fascinating. And I think like all of this, it resonates with people. And I think we want to look at stuff that resonates with us. We people by nature, we want to feel a part of something. When, how many times you see something, it's like, oh, I know that that's my neighbor. That's my neighbor. We get all excited. And I think that's what it is for me about projects is that it's so much easier to relate to a group of people, to a place when you're including a whole project. It's like you're bringing in, you're not just taking one molecule, you're taking a whole bunch. And by that token, you're going to bring in a lot more people. There's going to be a lot more interest in it. It says a lot more. I run over that bridge. So this image for me, again, it's like I'm looking at all these images and it's just it resonates so deeply with me.
yeah, well, thank you. But it's one of those things where, as the photographer, the trick is to make images that both kind of stand alone. This is one of my favorite from the project as well, just as kind of a modern city landscape. Um, but this is the purpose of it is to expand one's idea of the property. This was the northeast corner of the Jamel property. And, what do you see now? You see, um, the Cross Bronx Expressway. And, uh, to me, the hardest thing was figuring out how to incorporate all the traffic without, um, seeing the trucks. So, I ended up dragging the shutter a little bit so that you feel the presence of the city and the bustle, but you're not looking at somebody's Toyota parked, on the ramp below or, down here, that kind of thing.
Because
So,
traffic's never moving on that ramp right there. So
no, that's right. Well, you can see
you're just,
here, it's like
yeah,
that kind of thing. But, that's the whole idea is the ability to, for me, the one of the nice things is kind of looking back through all this work, or, is, it was a long road to get yourself the tools to tell a story. And then, um, and then having fun telling the story. And, that's what it's all about. So that when you look through these projects, it's like the photographs themselves can kind of stand on their own. But if you looked at this image in particularly just on its own, you wouldn't really know that it relates in any way, shape, or form to Morris Jamel Mansion, unless you have the context of the caption or seeing the show in its entirety, that kind of thing. So, it's always the driving force for me with doing these pictures, particularly this, is really just the mystery of it. It's like, what's going on here? It's just, and again, we used some artwork from the turn of the century, as like, this is what it looked like in the early 1900s, and here we are today. And
that just
then,
adds a level of fascination.
yeah, and then, the one other little thing that, again, it's like very New York little thing, and it was deliberate to leaving it in, but, somebody's sneakers got tossed in the tree. It's 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 that little thing that
And
you see repeatedly in the city in certain neighborhoods and all that kind of thing. And, to me, that's the part and parcel of the story that you're telling when you're trying to tell a story of New York. So,
Yeah, I mean, think
Anyway,
about it.
I've been
If
yakking
somebody
away.
were to look at your image hundreds of years later, the same way that you're looking at these drawings hundreds of years later, and that's a detail that's like, wow, hundreds of years ago, and maybe they will still be throwing sneakers up on power lines and branches and
Right.
anything else. It's kind of cool.
Yep. All right. Well, I've been kind of running out of gas yakking here. So,
No, you're good. You're good. Look, we'll
okay.
pull that down for you. Bruce, this was everything everything we talked about and then some. I mean, it was great to really, like I said, get inside your mind and see the way your brain works and how you photograph these, and not even just the
Getting
photographing.
inside
It's
of my mind is, I don't even want to go there. Anyway,
same. That's why
no,
we that's why we got along. That's
yeah, absolutely.
No, this was it's super inspiring, and I always love when we can be inspired. I mean, it's simple as that. I love being inspired because you never know when someone needs that kick in the seat of the pants, or when somebody feels tapped out or out of gas. And I'll be honest, man, that's where I've been in my work, and that's why I love talking about projects, because projects require so much more. Anybody can go out and see one cool scene and photograph a scene. A project is really, it's a labor of love, it's passion, it's pouring your heart and soul to something. I do have one final question, because
Sure.
it's the super cliche project question, but I do want your take on it, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask. How do you know a project is done? What is it for you?
Um, that is it's such a good question. And uh, I don't know that a video producer uh, had one of the best lines, and he said, when you shoot a video, you never finish, it's just abandoned, and because there's always more to shoot and you always think you can do. Um, I think for the large part, I think when I find myself duplicating shots, or the last things that I've done are more duplicative than enlightening. And, that's there's a fine line sometimes. Sometimes you just run out of like uh, steam, and it's like you're exploring this, and it's like, all right, time to move on. Um, the Morris Jamel project was a very compressed timeline. It was literally like shooting an assignment, albeit a quote unquote art assignment. Um, and um, So I had a hard deadline. The show needed to be up by a particular date, and I had less than a year to produce the whole thing. So I was out
Mm.
shooting and, just kind of winging it. And, in the end, it worked out. I felt like I didn't leave anything out, which was really nice for me. I felt like I got everything I wanted to. Um, and part of that came from, having the experience of done so much commercial work where you have deadlines for stories. So I was comfortable with it. The Elevated Lines project, somebody else asked me that same question. And it's like, a month after the project was shot, um, they tore down this one structure at a station, so it was gone. And I could continually update that project, forever, because so much changes in New York so quickly. Um, but it's the idea of like, all right, next. It's frankly, getting anything done over the last couple of years with COVID, and the subways were not a place I wanted to be over that period of time. So I finished that project. So, it's um, it's a combination of things, and mostly my own motivations. It's like, did I feel like I got the story? That's what determines it.
I love that. I gave you completely cliche, over asked question, and you knocked it out of the park with an answer that I haven't heard yet. So you get the you get the gold star today, Bruce.
Thank you.
Now it's always good chatting with you, man. To quote a wonderful movie, Wedding Crashers, you're a really enlightened cat, and I love that about you.
Thank you.
Now,
I certainly appreciate that.
now it's a great body of
It's
work.
news
A
to pretty
lot of
much anybody that knows me, but thank you, thank you.
now we'll have to catch up. You know, being neighbors and all, we'll have to catch up down at the old coffee, the corner coffee spot,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
maybe roam inwood. You can show me, you know, game me on some parts because I'm sure there's plenty in my own neighborhood that I don't even know and I'm missing out on. So Bruce, always great talking with you, man. I want to
Oh,
thank you.
my
This was
pleasure.
super informative. I checked in on the YouTube chat and beautiful work. You know, comments coming in there. They love the work. Beautiful work. I'd give a special shout out to Warren, Deborah, Andrew over there in the chat. Let's see. Deborah says, I love this because not only the images are historical and wonderful, this is a real contribution to both the history of New York and photography as a whole. Thank you. Great
Wow.
presentation. I think
Thank
that's a
you. I'm I'm really, really delighted that people are getting that out of this stuff. That's ultimately, that's the goal. One of the little things about being a photographer is that it's not like a performance art where you know how people react to your work instantly if you're a musician or that kind of thing. The what people get out of it is always a mystery. And even when you have a show up, people look, oh, well, that's nice. You never get that reaction. So thank you very much.
Love that. Well, that's a perfect way to tie it up, Bruce. A huge thank you to you again for taking the time to sit down with us and go through your lovely body of work. And to all of our viewers out there, we always appreciate you guys tuning in. I hope you guys got as much out of this as I did. Hopefully, you're inspired, helps you see the world in a new way, and you start creating with more intention. So, on that note, another edition of the B&H Event Space now in the books. Catch y'all next time.